What's up, guys? I'm Caleb. And the truth is, we never outgrow the need to ask questions. Sometimes questions are just fun. I mean, just think about it. What's the last thing you Googled? From a toddler asking why they can't put the dog in the washing machine to wondering how old certain celebrities are, or how to spell certain words, or why our best friend's grandma is just so much cooler than our own grandma. The problem is that we can't Google search every answer we're looking for. Actually, I take that back. We definitely can. We just may not always get a clear answer. I once Googled, are blueberries good for you? And I got answers like 10 proven health benefits of blueberries. And then just to see, I Googled, are blueberries bad for you? And I got answers like, the health risks of eating blueberries. Like, what? And that's a random example, but you get my point. We're wired to look for answers. And usually the topics of our biggest questions are more intense than blueberries. We may wonder things like, why am I here? Who are my people? What am I supposed to do with my life? And hunting for answers to questions like that can get complicated. So for the next few weeks, we're gonna spend some time discussing some big questions. And the goal is that by the end of this series, we'll not only become more comfortable asking questions, but we'll also grow closer to other people that we can ask those questions with. So to start off, we're gonna ask a somewhat churchy question. Maybe you've wondered this before, or maybe you haven't. It's totally fine either way. But the question is, what does it mean to follow Jesus? Now, some people would say that our answer to this question changes everything about our lives. And if that's true, then yes, this is a big question. The problem is that if you've watched 5 different TikToks or 5 different YouTube videos, you'd get 5 different answers for what that means. And when there are multiple possible answers to a question, it's confusing. In fact, let's take a quick look at what TikTok or Google suggests as the answer to this question. Use this kind of Bible, play this kind of music, pray for 15 hours a week, real Christians dress like this, and talk like this, and spend their time like this. The list goes on. And my point is, a lot of people have different opinions about what it looks like to follow Jesus. The problem is, if we say the answer to the question, what does it mean to follow Jesus, could change everything for us, but then the answers we find online are pretty shallow, then why follow him? In fact, we aren't even sure he really does much of anything for our lives besides make our social media bio look good or give us something to do for a few hours on the weekend. For a lot of people, he kind of just lives off to the side of our real lives, and every once in a while, he might cross your mind. For some of you, that's maybe why you don't follow him at all, because you don't really see how following him would change much of anything for you. So what's the point? In other words, if following Jesus doesn't seem to really do anything for your life, then it makes sense you wouldn't want to follow him. I get it. See, people have been asking what it means to follow Jesus for a very, very long time. People are asking it now, and people were asking it thousands of years ago when Jesus showed up. Now, in the Gospels, the part of the Bible that tells us about Jesus' life, we're given an insider look at what following Jesus is all about. See, Matthew writes this. One day, as Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew, throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them, "Come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets at once and followed him. Jesus was a teacher. Back in the day, religious leaders, not just Jesus, had disciples, which were people who followed them around to learn from them. Disciples kind of found their identity in being associated with a certain teacher because of what that teacher taught. Now, surely Peter and Andrew wondered what made Jesus different from other teachers, and probably wondered things like, where would following him take them? And how long would they be gone? Jesus answers by basically saying, follow me and watch the way I live my life. Watch how I do things, and then go and do the same. And when you do that, you know what will happen? Instead of being people who pull fish out of the water, you'll spend your time inviting humans to know God better and be who God has made them to be. I will bring out of you a new way of living and being in the world. And then, for whatever reason, Andrew and Peter agree to go with him. They left their fishing nets, their careers, their identities, and their community, and they followed Jesus. What I want us to really notice is that Jesus didn't have them first pass a Bible test. He didn't ask them if they were religious. He didn't ask around to find out how good their behavior was. He didn't tell them that they were going to be better than other people. Nope. He simply invited them to follow in his footsteps and do as he did, talk as he talked, and love as he loved. He invited them to go where he went so that they could be more like him. And the thing is, when they left their nets, their families, and their way of doing life, they were probably filled with a ton of questions like, where are we going? How is this all going to turn out? And for those of us who are familiar with the life of Jesus, it can be easy to forget that when Jesus started out, no one knew how this story would unfold. No one could have anticipated how it would all go down. I mean, as far as they knew, Jesus was just another interesting religious teacher. But if you fast forward 3 years, over the course of their time together, these disciples would see Jesus walk on water, heal the sick, and raise people from the dead. They would hear him speak and watch him forgive sins. They would see him arrested and sentenced to death without even putting up a fight. And finally, after 3 days of being dead and buried, they'd see him alive again. I mean, things that they never could have imagined. And what's also crazy is what following Jesus meant to the disciples after Jesus was gone. Peter ends up becoming the first pope. Except for John, every one of Jesus' disciples died defending their love and faith in Jesus and what he represented. Thousands of years later, we're still looking at their stories, learning from them, and even naming children after them. When Jesus asked them to follow him, they had no idea what they would do and who they would become, but he did. Jesus had a life in mind for them that was bigger than the life they were currently living. He had more in mind for who they'd become. He had more in mind for the relationships they would have. And he had more in mind for how much they would matter in the world. Their biggest life questions found answers bigger and better than they would have ever dreamed of from their boats. You could say it this way: Jesus had more in mind for their lives in the areas that mattered most. And in the same way, he has more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most. If we had asked Andrew, Peter, and the other disciples, "Ayo, what does it mean to follow Jesus?" at the start of their time with him, they wouldn't have known, but they knew enough to take one step at a time. They knew they didn't have everything figured out or have to have everything figured out on day one. They just had to commit one day at a time, one step at a time, to following Jesus and his example. And in doing that, they began to live out what following Jesus meant. As a result, they found more purpose and direction. They found better relationships. They had more joy and peace. They found something worth giving their lives to. They found answers to what they were looking for. And we can too. Think of it this way. When you really understand who Jesus is, it changes everything. Following Jesus can help us answer our biggest questions, because if Jesus has more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most, then following him will lead to clarity in those areas. For the disciples, following Jesus was an adventure that changed who they were and who they became. Jesus changed their lives in the best way possible. I mean, sure, he taught them and spoke about their behavior, but more than that, he loved them and he served them. Following him wasn't about religion and a bunch of rules. It wasn't about a social media aesthetic or about following secondhand information from other people who claimed to know him. It was about a personal experience, a life-changing encounter with Jesus himself. It was a journey that led them to bigger, better lives than they could have ever imagined. So, what about us? We can't be physically present with Jesus like they were. So, What can we do? Well, whether you are already following Jesus or are just thinking about it, here are a few things that I think we can do to get started. First, start reimagining what following Jesus looks like. Consider asking yourself, has my view of following Jesus become too small? Have I reduced it to a bunch of rules or lists of do's and don'ts? What if it's bigger than that? What if it's an adventure? What if it's life-changing? What if it's the friendship I've always wanted? Write it down, draw it out, visualize it in a new way. And two, take a step. Follow the example of Andrew and Peter. They simply took a step to follow Jesus. They left their nets. They didn't know what would happen with their lives. They just trusted him enough to take one step. What would a step look like for you? Now, don't overwhelm yourself with 3 or 5 years down the road and all the steps to take to get you there. Start with just one single thing, one single step. Maybe it would be to be honest with God and be open with him about some questions you have. Maybe it would be to have a conversation with your small group leader or another adult that you trust about what's actually going on in your life. Maybe it would be to show up here consistently or engage with your small group. Identify your next step and then be bold enough to take it. Now, think about these 3 questions. Who am I? Where do I fit in? Can I make a difference? Over the next few weeks, we're gonna look at and dig into these questions. Following Jesus can help us as we learn to answer these questions. Jesus isn't just a separate category in our lives. He's part of figuring this stuff out. Invite him into the process. Include him. See what Jesus has to say about the biggest questions you have about yourself. He just might surprise you with what he has to say. So, spend some time thinking about them. Guys, Jesus has more in mind for our lives in the areas that matter most. Imagine if we could really understand this fully. Like, what if we could see following Jesus as life-changing? What if we quit seeing it as a list of religious rules and start seeing it as bigger than that? And what if we trusted that following him can help us answer our biggest questions? We have no idea where that journey would take us. But Andrew and Peter, they didn't either. And it took them places beyond what they could imagine. As you head out, remember that this is one of the reasons why we have small groups. We want to have a safe place to ask big questions with others who are asking the same sorts of things. We want the opportunity to learn from each other and encourage one another as we figure out what following Jesus is all about.